Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 11th of September. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open in Washington with the Iranian nuclear accord, and despite 58 senators favoring a resolution against it and just 42 for the agreement with Tehran, the deal has survived the U.S. Senate. Democrats overcame ferocious Republican opposition and delivered U.S. President Barack Obama a major victory on his top foreign policy priority. The disapproval resolution fell narrowly short of the 60 votes needed to move forward, as most Democratic and independent senators banded together against it, all but guaranteeing that the measure would not reach Obama's desk and that the nuclear deal will move forward unchecked by a Congress controlled by Republicans. It's an improbable win by the administration in the face of additional staunch opposition from the U.S. presidential campaign trail, as well as the State of Israel. Republicans say that they are still committed to working against the international accord as members of the House of Representatives continue to pursue 11th-hour strategies to derail it against all odds and are now promising to hold a revote. Beginning next week, Obama will be free to start implementing the agreement negotiated by Iran, the U.S., and 5 other world powers by scaling back American sanctions. The accord aims to restrict nuclear ambitions in the rogue state in exchange for hundreds of billions of dollars in relief from international sanctions. Opponents never had much chance of blocking the deal in Congress, where the Democratic minorities in the House and Senate could secure a win for Obama simply by upholding his veto of the resolution with a mere third of the votes. Yet it was widely expected in the days after the signing of the July 14th pact that Obama would have to use his veto pen. Before the vote, the debate on the Senate floor raged for hours.
Frankly, in my view, the overall sanctions relief being provided, given the Iranians' understanding of restrictions on the reauthorization of sanctions, along with the lifting of the arms and missile embargo well before Iranian compliance over years is established, leaves us in a weaker position, and to me, is unacceptable.
This is the guy that you're going to give $100 billion to. A clear pathway to Obama. He doesn't even have to cheat to get there, and buy more weapons to attack us. At least Chamberlain lied.
Iran's nuclear program will still be subject to heightened monitoring by the IAEA, and Iran's nuclear supply chain will still be subject to uniquely intrusive monitoring, which will limit Iran's ability to divert nuclear materials and equipment to a secret program without being detected. Iran must never, ever have a nuclear weapon, and we will still have every option we currently have, up to and including the use of military force to prevent that from happening.
The conditions for the lifting of the sanctions are strict and verifiable, and that the lifting of the sanctions, though, comes more quickly than I would like. I believe that snapback could work. But after looking at all of the alternatives, which I believe have limited efficacy, I want to declare that I will support the agreement.
A two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is desirable, not because it will have any significant influence on the turmoil roiling through the Middle East, but rather because this would prevent the establishment of a binational state. Those were the words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in London during his address to 120 members of Parliament and the House of Lords from parties across the political spectrum. Netanyahu said that the solution to Israel's conflict with the Palestinians is a demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes a Jewish state as the nation state of the Jewish people. He went on to say that he has been in wars, personally wounded, lost loved ones, and held a fellow soldier who died in his arms when he was only 18 years old, concluding that peace is infinitely preferable and that it is absurd for anyone to believe that he or the people of Israel prefer conflict and are not ready to take the steps necessary for peace.
I had the opportunity now to discuss with Prime Minister Cameron how to seize the opportunities and how to meet the challenges. And this is what I'd like to start my remarks with. And then I said in 10 Downing Street now, again, here's the acid test. It's simple. I am willing right now, without any preconditions whatsoever, to sit down with President Abbas and negotiate this peace. I'm willing to go to Ramallah, yes. A nightmare for my security people, but I often do that when I stop at falafel stands. They'll have to deal with it, okay? Or President Abbas can come to Jerusalem, or for God's sake, we can take up some of these suggestions for retreats in Sicily or fjords in Norway or whatever. Anytime, anywhere, now, without preconditions. All right?
Netanyahu also met with the members of British-Israeli Friendship Parliamentary Associations after holding talks with Prime Minister David Cameron. Netanyahu returned to Israel today after his two-day visit to London, which followed his summit in Italy with Prime Minister Matteo Renzi a week ago. It was announced yesterday that he's also slated to meet with German Chancellor Angela Merkel next month. In other news, the Prime Minister is reacting angrily to a resolution by the European Parliament calling for the labeling of goods made in Jewish settlements. While invoking the Second World War, the Premier branded the resolution as unjust and brought up the historical memory of what happened when Europe marked Jewish products before. He said that the action distorts justice and logic and certainly does not advance peace, stressing that the root of the conflict is not the territories nor the settlements. The resolution passed 525 to 70 with 31 abstentions. It calls on the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Federica Mogherini, to take the lead with the Commission to complete guidelines on the labeling of Israeli settlement produce. Deputy Foreign Minister Tzipi Hotovely said that Israel will not accept discrimination between goods produced in different parts of its territory, and she condemned the measure as a boycott. And Israel was dealt another diplomatic blow when the United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly approved a resolution allowing the Palestinians to raise their flag at the world body's headquarters in a symbolic step pursued by the Palestinians in their quest for an independent state. Israel was joined by 7 other countries that voted against the proposal, including the United States, while 119 nations approved the measure and 45 abstained. The resolution allows non-member observer states to raise their flags alongside those of the 193 UN member states. The Palestinians and the Vatican are the only 2 observers, but the Holy See backed away from the effort and refused to co-sponsor the resolution. Most of the 28-nation European Union were among those who abstained from the voting. However, France and more than half a dozen others voted in favor of the resolution. The victory for the Palestinians at the UN follows their winning General Assembly approval in late 2012 to raise their status from that of an observer to being a non-member observer state. That has allowed the Palestinians to join several UN organizations, including its cultural UNESCO organization, and many international treaties, such as the Rome Statute that was established at the International Criminal Court. Palestinian UN Ambassador Riyad Mansour predictably embraced this latest development.
Today's vote is a reaffirmation of the legitimacy of the national aspirations of the Palestinian people, of their existence among the nations of the world, and their right to self-determination, to be a free people in control of their lives and destiny in their own independent state. The General Assembly's adoption of this resolution will help to restore some hope to our people and leadership as they continue on the peaceful, non-violent, political, legal path which they have chosen and remain committed to against all odds, to fulfill the rights of the Palestinian people, achieve a just and sustainable peace, and secure Palestine's rightful place among the community of nations.
The real question we face is not whether the Palestinians will raise a flag, but whether the United Nations will raise a white flag and surrender the principles of this institution itself. Let no one in this hall or around the world be fooled by the outcome of today's vote. The Assembly would vote to declare that the earth is flat if the Palestinians propose it.
Returning now to the Iranian nuclear deal, and as part of his intense pressure to gain backing for the pact ahead of the debate on Capitol Hill, Obama enlisted support from military veterans and mothers of soldiers who were killed in action.
There are times where, in a debate like this, we hear a lot of loose talk, casual threats of military force, false promises that military actions will be easy or simple or relatively costless. These veterans and their families remind us that that is not the case. They know the consequences when we rush into war. They understand what it means when we act without broad international support and when we fail to consider unintended consequences. And I want to repeat, none of them are under any illusions. They understand that this is a dangerous world. It is precisely for that reason that they want to make sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. What I indicated to them is that even as this debate winds down, I am hopeful that their voices continue to be heard on a wide range of foreign policy debates. Because we live in a complicated world and we live in a world where terrible things happen. And American leadership is going to be vital in addressing those issues. But the one principle that I want us to remember every time we make a decision is that American power is not restricted just to our military actions, that we have a lot of tools in the toolkit, and that we have to try to solve problems without resort to military force, understanding that at the end of the day there may be times where we have to act militarily. But we don't do so as a first resort, and we certainly don't do so on the basis of political considerations, because the sacrifices are too significant and the stakes are too high.
The U.S. president told some 500 American rabbis during a telephone call ahead of the Jewish New Year that security talks with Israel have resumed, and that he also hopes to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu by early next month. In his annual pre-High Holy Days talk with the Jewish clergy, Obama expressed his willingness to meet with the Israeli leader during the United Nations General Assembly opening session, which starts next week and runs through October 6th. According to a statement released by the White House, Obama fielded questions after his opening statement and addressed issues including the Voting Rights Act, combating anti-Semitism worldwide, climate change, and the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. The president also said that he is still dedicated to advancing the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks, despite the collapse of U.S. brokered process last year. Iran has deployed hundreds of elite fighters to Syria in an unprecedented deepening of its involvement on behalf of President Bashar al-Assad in the civil war raging in the Arab Republic. This according to Israeli security officials in a briefing to reporters, adding that fighters from Iran's Revolutionary Guard have taken up positions around the village of Zabadani north of Damascus over the past few days. That high ground is in an area near the Syrian border with Lebanon and overlooks the Damascus-Beirut highway, potentially offering control of large parts of Lebanon. If the Islamic State forces or other opponents were able to seize the territory, they would potentially be able to target Alawite forces loyal to Assad. The security sources say that the Israeli defense establishment sees the move as a dramatic escalation of Iran's involvement in Syria, but that Jerusalem has no intention of intervening at this stage. The fight waged by Prime Minister Netanyahu against the Iranian deal has turned Israel into a partisan issue in Washington. That's the view political analyst Mitchell Barak expressed while speaking with IBA's R.A. O'Sullivan.
Well, the Prime Minister and the way that this fight has been played out, which really started with the Prime Minister going to Congress against the wishes of the White House and making that a big issue, where he was able to, even his detractors who felt that maybe it was not the right time to go, he was able to make Israel's case. But once the deal was signed, I think trying to fight the U.S. president on his home turf within Congress and Senate, knowing that the president can veto, and it's almost impossible to override a veto with 2/3, the relationship with Israel is not only somewhat damaged from this fight, but Israel has become a somewhat partisan issue in America. And even among people within the Jewish community, the level of debate was so low of people who are supporting and people who are opposing the agreement, meaning there was not necessarily respect for a healthy debate, and I think it's been a very divisive and fracturing issue.
And that's Netanyahu's fault?
Not necessarily Netanyahu's fault, but the Prime Minister went after this as his #1 policy goal was to stop this. When, I think when you get into a fight, into a political battle, you have to see what are your chances of winning this. And the chances of winning against a president on his home turf are very, very slim. So what's the cost? Even if you're going to win, is it worth the cost? At the end of the day, it looks the same way it did when they signed the agreement, that when the President of the United States is presenting something to Congress, he's going to get the deal through. So, it's sort of a Sisyphus-type battle to stop the agreement, but in the end, we've lost a lot of ground.
Minister of Defense Moshe Ya'alon has reconfirmed that security forces know who is behind the deadly arson attack in Douma last month, which claimed the lives of 3 members of the Arab Dawabsha family and critically injured the 4-year-old surviving child. He first made the statement during a meeting of the Likud youth branch earlier this week and repeated it again yesterday during a briefing at the Kiryat military base that focused on the lack of progress in apprehending the assailants. According to Ya'alon, the findings are not being released in order to protect the nation's intelligence services as they continue to establish solid evidence. The Dawabsha and another Arab family home were set ablaze in a firebomb attack by suspected Jewish extremists on July 31st, who also spray-painted graffiti in Hebrew at the site. 18-month-old baby Ali was burned to death. His father Saed succumbed to injuries a week later, and his mother Riham died last week. His 4-year-old brother Ahmed remains hospitalized and fighting for his life at the intensive care unit of Beersheva's Soroka Hospital. Nuclear whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu has been arrested again. It is widely believed that the reason he was detained is because of his interview with Channel 2 a week ago. The 60-year-old was picked up in a joint operation of the Central Unit of the Jerusalem Police and the Shin Bet Security Service, which has carefully monitored his activities since he was released from prison 11 years ago. The former nuclear technician at the Douma reactor served 18 years behind bars for revealing details of Israel's presumed weapons program to the British press in 1986. Terms of his parole included being barred from leaving Jerusalem or speaking to the foreign press for 1 year, although those injunctives have regularly been extended over the past decade. His attorney insists that the Friday interview was not in breach of his parole and that the segment had been approved by the military censor. Vanunu has repeatedly petitioned the state to be allowed to move abroad. In financial news, the shekel today ended the trading week by gaining strength against all major foreign currencies. And due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. Turning to the weather, and I'm afraid there's no change. Tomorrow's going to be another hazy, muggy, and unseasonably hot day. Sorry about that. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow when I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.